The maitre d' barely glanced at me before giving a polite, almost rehearsed smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's no reservation under your name." I blinked a little, thrown off, and glanced back at the polished brass plaque above the entrance. The place was everything I'd imagined: warm lighting, soft jazz playing, and the kind of luxury you could taste in the air. "That's impossible," I said, keeping my voice even. "I was invited to dinner with my husband's family. They should already be here." The maitre d' offered me a patient look, the kind of expression you reserve for a child who doesn't understand the rules. "I checked thoroughly, ma'am. There's a reservation for 6 under Williamstone, but—" "Oh, Hannah!" a sharp, amused voice interrupted. My mother-in-law's voice, crisp and perfectly enunciated, always carried an edge of performance. "Did you really think I'd include you in tonight's dinner?" I turned slowly, my heart beating a little too loud in my chest. There she was, Elaine Stone. Her platinum hair was swept up in a classic French twist, and she wore a tailored emerald dress that looked like it had been designed just for her. She sat at the head of the table, her posture as rigid as her smile. My husband Noah sat stiffly beside her, his eyes darting to me, and then away just as quickly. His sisters Rebecca and Julia leaned in close, whispering behind flutes of sparkling water. "I don't understand," I said, careful to keep my tone calm, even as heat crept up my neck. Elaine's smile widened, almost pitying. "Oh, sweetheart, you actually showed up. How quaint." She gave a little laugh, as though I just tripped over my own feet. "This is a family dinner, dear. A place like this." Her gaze flicked around the candlelit dining room. "It's a bit out of your league, don't you think?" Rebecca snickered behind her glass. Julia kept her eyes down, as though she might vanish if she didn't look at me. Noah said nothing. He just sat there, his fingers white-knuckling the edge of his water glass. I should have felt humiliated. A few years ago, I might have. But now, as I watched the other diners cast curious glances at the little scene unfolding in the corner, I felt something shift inside me. A slow, deliberate calm. Elaine had spent years reminding me that I didn't belong in her family. Her barbs had been subtle at first, a comment about my plain taste in jewelry, a passing remark about my humble upbringing. But tonight she'd decided to put me in my place once and for all. And I realized in that moment that I was done letting her. I smiled a slow curve that made her smirk falter for just a heartbeat. Then I turned to the maitre d'. "Would you mind asking the owner to come out, please?" My voice was smooth, unhurried. Elaine let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Oh, really, Hannah? You think the owner will come out for you?" I turned back to her, meeting her gaze directly. "Yes," I said simply, "because the owner knows me very well." Elaine's expression didn't crack, but there it was, just a flicker of doubt in her eyes. The maitre d' hesitated clearly, unsure whether to humor me. Before he could respond, a deep voice cut through the hushed room. "Hannah!" I turned just as Daniel Monroe emerged from the back hallway. He was in his early 50s, silver at his temples, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. He carried himself with the ease of a man who owned the room, and in this case, he literally did. Elaine's eyes widened slightly, and even Noah looked startled. "Daniel," I said, my smile warming. "It's been a while." He stepped closer, his gaze flicking over to Elaine, then to Noah and the sisters, before settling back on me. "It has." "What brings you here tonight?" I gestured lightly toward the table. Apparently, I wasn't included in the reservation. I said, my tone light, but every word deliberate. "A bit of an oversight, wouldn't you say?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he smiled. "That won't do at all." He turned to the maitre d'. "Prepare a place for Hannah immediately." Elaine scoffed, folding her arms across her chest. "This is a private dining room, Daniel. You can't just—" "You're right, Mrs. Stone," Daniel said smoothly, his voice even. "We don't accept last-minute walk-ins. But Hannah isn't a walk-in." His eyes softened as he looked back at me. "She's family." A stunned hush fell over the table. Rebecca's glass slipped slightly in her hand. Julia's eyes darted back and forth. And Noah finally looked at me, his mouth slightly open. Elaine, though, was not so easily rattled. Family, that's rich, she said, her smile stretched tight. You must be mistaken. Hannah is my son's wife, not actually, I said calmly, cutting in before she could finish Daniel, and I go way back. Elaine's gaze narrowed. How I leaned in slightly, letting my voice carry just enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Before I married Noah, I worked in fine dining. Daniel was my mentor. I learned everything I know about service and hospitality from him. A heavy silence settled over the table. Elaine opened her mouth, but Daniel spoke first, his tone almost gentle. Hannah wasn't just another employee, he said. She was the best I ever trained. Elaine's face tightened her plans for the night, unraveling by the second. I turned to the maitre d', who was now standing a little straighter. I assume Daniel's word is enough to find me a seat. Of course, Miss Grace, he said quickly. Right away. As a waiter began setting a place beside Noah, I felt a flicker of triumph. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. But I did lean in just enough to murmur to Elaine. Seems there's room for me after all. Her fingers clenched around her napkin knuckles white. This wasn't over. I knew that. But as I sat down at the table, feeling Daniel's reassuring presence behind me, I also knew one thing: the game had changed. And I was done playing by anyone else's rules. The weight of the restaurant's silence settled around me like a heavy cloak. I took a slow breath, steadying my heart as the waiter placed a gleaming silver plate in front of me. He moved with careful precision, setting down cutlery that glinted in the warm candlelight. The scent of roasted garlic and fresh herbs drifted up from the plate, but I barely tasted it. My attention was squarely on the table and on Elaine's frozen smile. Enjoy the waiter, said, bowing his head before retreating. I picked up my fork, feeling the smooth weight of the polished handle in my fingers. Across the table, Rebecca and Julia were stealing glances at each other. Noah's eyes flickered from me to his mother, his jaw tightening with every passing second of tension. Elaine finally broke the silence with a brittle laugh. Well, this is certainly unexpected. She shifted in her seat, her posture as rigid as ever. I suppose it's only natural that you'd know people in hospitality. She said it like it was a dirty word, her lips curling around it as if it tasted sour. I arched a brow, letting the moment stretch. Hospitality, I repeated softly, tasting the word for myself. You make it sound like a weakness. Elaine's smile was all teeth. I simply meant that it must have been quite the adjustment for you, marrying into a family like ours. Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp the way a blade glints just before it cuts. Noah shifted in his seat, but he still said nothing. I didn't let Elaine's words rattle me. Instead, I took a bite of the delicate amuse-bouche, savoring the buttery flakiness of the pastry. When I swallowed, I set my fork down and met her gaze evenly. You're right, I said softly, and the entire table seemed to lean in closer, drawn by the calm certainty in my voice. It has been an adjustment, but not for the reasons you think. Elaine's eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening around the stem of her wineglass. Is that so? I nodded. Yes. Because unlike you, Elaine, I know what it means to work for everything I have. A stunned hush fell over the table. Rebecca's lips parted in shock. Julia's eyes darted to her mother, then back to me. Noah looked as though he'd forgotten how to breathe. Elaine's face hardened. Excuse me, I didn't blink. You heard me? You married into wealth. You inherited status. But me, I leaned back, letting my smile widen. I built my own life, my own career. I learned how to stand on my own long before I ever met your son. For a moment, all I could hear was the soft clinking of cutlery and the low hum of conversation from other tables. But at this table, the silence was electric. Elaine's jaw worked as though she were grinding her teeth behind those polite lips. You're being dramatic, Hannah, she said finally, her voice dripping with false concern. No one is questioning your humble beginnings. I let out a soft, almost amused breath. Of course you're not. You never have to say it outright. You just like to remind me of them, like tonight, for instance. Elaine's nostrils flared, a faint flush creeping up her neck. Noah still wouldn't meet my eyes, his fingers tapping nervously against his glass. I felt a small pang, seeing him so clearly trapped between the two women in his life. But I pushed it aside. Tonight wasn't about him. Tonight was about me. I took another bite of the dish, letting the flavors roll over my tongue. When I swallowed, I set the fork down with a quiet click and leaned in just enough to meet Elaine's eyes directly. "Let me make one thing perfectly clear," I said softly, my voice calm but firm. "I didn't marry Noah because I needed saving. I married him because I wanted to build something together. But if you think for 1 second that I'll let you diminish me—" Elaine's mouth opened, but I kept going. "You're mistaken. Because I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly what I bring to this table." For the first time since I'd met her, I saw something flicker behind Elaine's eyes. It wasn't just anger, it was uncertainty. And that, more than anything else, told me that I had finally struck a nerve. Noah let out a breath, his shoulders sagging like a man who'd been holding up the sky for too long. "Hannah," he said, his voice a low murmur, "maybe we should—" I held up a hand, cutting him off without ever looking at him. "Noah, not tonight. I'm done pretending." Elaine's lips thinned, her composure cracking. She set her glass down with a soft thud. "You're playing a dangerous game, Hannah." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "No, Elaine. I'm just finally playing my own game." A flicker of movement caught my eye. Over Elaine's shoulder, I saw a familiar figure, Daniel, watching from a discreet distance. His expression unreadable, but his presence grounding me. He gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but enough to steady my resolve. Elaine took a slow sip of her wine, her fingers shaking just slightly. "You may think you've won something here tonight, but don't fool yourself. You're still— you." I tilted my head, letting the silence that followed speak for itself. "That's right," I said finally. "I'm still me, and I'm more than enough." Across the table, Rebecca's smirk was gone. Julia was staring at me like she'd never really seen me before. Noah looked lost. And Elaine. For the first time, she didn't have a retort ready. The tension settled in around us again, thick and suffocating. But this time, I wasn't the one who felt small. I took a slow breath, feeling my spine straighten, my shoulders square. And in that quiet moment, I realized that everything Elaine had tried to do tonight, every petty slight, every carefully worded insult, had only strengthened my resolve. Because I wasn't here to be humiliated. I was here to remind them all that I didn't need their acceptance. I had already accepted myself. As I picked up my glass and took a slow sip, I caught Daniel's eye again. He gave me a small, knowing smile, and I let my own lips curl in return. Elaine could plot and scheme all she wanted. She could whisper behind her perfect hand and try to cut me down with words that dripped with condescension. But she couldn't take away what I had built for myself. And she certainly couldn't make me feel like I didn't belong, not anymore. I could feel Elaine's eyes on me as I lifted the glass to my lips, her stare like a cold weight against my skin. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I let the sparkling wine slide down my throat, the crisp bubbles popping like tiny stars on my tongue. I set the glass back on the table with a soft, deliberate click. Elaine drew in a breath, her face a mask of practiced calm. "It's good to see you're enjoying yourself, Hannah," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Though I do hope you're not mistaking Daniel's courtesy for anything more." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "More." She gave a little dismissive laugh. "Oh, you know, he's always had a soft spot for those he's trained." Her eyes gleamed with challenge. "It must be comforting for you to have such familiarity here." I smiled, feeling a flush of cold anger in my chest, but refusing to let it show. "You're right, Elaine," I said calmly. "It is comforting to know that the people who taught me everything I know still believe in me, even when others don't." Noah shifted in his seat, his eyes darting to his mother, then to me. "Elaine!" He began, his voice tight, but she cut him off with a flick of her wrist. "Let's not make this evening about old ties," she said smoothly. "After all, this is about family." Family! The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Rebecca leaned forward, her smile tight. "We're all just different, I suppose," she said with an air of false sweetness. Some of us were born into this world. Others, well, they have to find their way in. Julia shot her sister a look, then turned back to me. Rebecca, she said quietly, but it was too late. The words were out, and the meaning was clear. I took another bite of the delicate fish dish in front of me, letting the flavors bloom across my tongue. I'd learned long ago that the best way to survive a table like this was to let them talk themselves into a corner. Finding your own way, I murmured, my voice almost thoughtful. Yes, I suppose that's true. It's not easy, is it, to make a place for yourself in a world that was never meant to include you? Elaine's fingers drummed softly on the tablecloth, her composure crackling at the edges. And yet she said, her tone light, but her words sharp. You do seem to have found your footing, haven't you? I gave a little shrug. I have, and I'm not about to lose it. A faint flush rose in her cheeks, and for a moment the mask slipped. She looked at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time, and didn't like what she saw. Noah cleared his throat, his voice low and uncertain. Hannah, maybe this isn't the place to what I cut in my gaze, steady on him. To speak the truth, to remind everyone at this table that I'm not here as a charity case. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The waiter reappeared at my side, his expression polite and professional. Is everything to your liking, Miss Grace? I gave him a calm, grateful smile. It's wonderful, thank you. He nodded and moved away, and I saw the flash of approval in Daniel's eyes from across the room. He hadn't intervened again, but his presence was a constant anchor, a silent reminder that I wasn't as alone as they all wanted me to believe. I turned back to the table, letting my gaze sweep over them, Elaine rigid and regal in her seat. Rebecca and Julia both clearly rattled, and Noah still unable to look at me. For a moment, I let the silence stretch, let the weight of my words settle over them all. And then I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs casually. You know, Elaine, I said softly, I've spent years trying to prove myself to this family, trying to show you that I belong. Elaine's eyes narrowed, a spark of triumph flickering in them, as though she thought she'd finally won. And you've done a commendable job, she said with false warmth. But at the end of the day, I interrupted smoothly. I don't need your approval anymore. The words fell into the silence, like stones into a pond, sending out ripples that touched every corner of the table. Rebecca's mouth dropped open. Julia looked as though she might faint, and Noah's head snapped up, his eyes wide, with something that might have been fear, or maybe something else entirely. Elaine's lips parted, a faint breath of disbelief slipping out. Excuse me, she said, her voice sharp, now the false civility gone. You heard me, I said quietly. I'm done trying to make you see me as worthy, because I already know I am. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension was a living thing, coiled and electric. Then Elaine's eyes flashed, her composure shattering like glass. You insolent! But before she could finish, Daniel's deep voice cut across the table. Mrs. Stone. He said, his tone mild, but his eyes cold. Perhaps we should remember that this is a restaurant, not a courtroom. Elaine's mouth snapped shut. She turned her glare on him, but Daniel only raised a brow, calm and unmoved. I would hate for your personal grievances to disrupt the experience of my other guests, he said smoothly. For a moment I thought she might actually argue, but then she pressed her lips together, swallowing whatever venom she'd been about to spit. I turned to Daniel, my expression softening. Thank you, Daniel, I said quietly. He gave me a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes, but was enough to remind me that I had allies here. Of course, Hannah, he said. Always. Elaine's face was a mask of barely controlled fury. She picked up her glass and took a long sip, her fingers trembling just slightly. I watched her, feeling a flicker of pity that surprised me. For all her power, for all her careful plotting, she was just a woman clinging to an illusion of control. Noah finally found his voice. Hannah, he said, his tone a low murmur. I think maybe we should leave. I met his gaze steadily. You're free to leave anytime you want, Noah, I said calmly. But I'm not done here. His lips pressed together, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He looked at his mother, then back at me, and for the first time I saw the fracture there, the line that had always been hidden beneath the surface. Elaine set her glass down with a soft clink. If you're so determined to play this role, Hannah, she said, her voice dripping with ice, then let's see how well you can keep it up. I leaned forward just enough to let her see the steel in my eyes. Oh, Elaine, I murmured, my voice soft and unyielding. You have no idea how good I am at playing a role. The words hung in the air, sharp and bright as a blade. And for the first time that evening, I saw the flicker of fear behind Elaine's eyes. Because she was finally starting to understand, I wasn't just here to endure her games. I was here to end them. The rest of the meal unfolded in a haze of polite conversation and brittle silences. Elaine kept her smile frozen in place, but every glance she shot my way was edged with daggers. Rebecca and Julia busied themselves with their plates, their movements a little too careful, as if they were trying to vanish between the linen napkins and glinting silverware. Noah, on the other hand, seemed to have retreated entirely into himself. His eyes were distant, fixed somewhere over my shoulder, as if he couldn't bear to meet the reality in front of him. I let them stew in their own discomfort, savoring each bite of the exquisite food. Every mouthful felt like a small act of defiance, a declaration that I wasn't going to fade into the background, no matter how hard Elaine tried to push me there. When the dessert course was finally served, the tension around the table had thickened to the point that even the waitstaff seemed to move with exaggerated caution. Daniel reappeared at my side, his smile calm, his eyes steady. I hope you're enjoying the chef's creation, he said softly. I nodded, my voice low and certain. It's perfect, Daniel. Thank you. He dipped his head, a small acknowledgement, before retreating once more. As he walked away, I caught the flicker of a smirk at the corner of his lips. He knew exactly what was unfolding here, and he knew that I was no longer the one on the defensive. Elaine's fingers tapped an impatient rhythm on the tablecloth. So, Hannah, she said at last, her tone honeyed, but her eyes cold. Tell me, what exactly is it that you're trying to prove here? I raised my brow, pausing with my fork halfway to my lips. Prove, I echoed, my voice calm. I'm not trying to prove anything, Elaine. I'm simply existing. Existing, she repeated, her lips curling in disdain. You call this existing playing at sophistication, surrounding yourself with people who only tolerate you because they're paid to do so. I set my fork down, folding my hands neatly in my lap. Funny, I said softly. I thought the same thing about you. The words landed between us with the weight of a stone. Rebecca's breath caught audibly. Julia's cheeks flushed pink, her eyes darting between her mother and me. Noah's shoulders tensed, his fingers tightening around his glass. Elaine's composure cracked just for a second. Her lips parted, a flicker of raw fury, breaking through the smooth veneer she'd perfected over decades. You arrogant little no, I interrupted quietly, my tone sharper than I'd intended. Not arrogant, just done. Elaine fell silent, her eyes narrowing to icy slits. The air around us felt charged, as if every word we spoke might spark and catch fire. I pushed back my chair slightly, the soft scrape of wood on marble, almost loud in the tense silence. I think I'll take some air, I said, my voice steady. Excuse me. I stood, feeling every pair of eyes in the room on me as I walked out of the private dining area and into the quiet hallway beyond. The hush of the corridor was a relief, a moment of calm in the storm. I paused, taking a slow breath, letting the weight of the evening settle into my bones. My reflection stared back at me. From a mirrored panel, dark hair swept into a neat chignon eyes, bright with something fierce and unbreakable. For the first time in a long while, I recognized the woman in the glass. She looked like someone who knew her worth. Hannah, a voice said quietly behind me. I turned to see Daniel standing there, his hands folded behind his back, his expression patient. Are you all right? He asked. I nodded slowly. I'm fine, I said. Better than fine, actually. He studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. You've grown stronger than when I first knew you, he said. You always had that in you. It's good to see it. I felt a warmth in my chest at his words. Thank you, Daniel, I murmured. He gave a small nod. She'll never stop, you know, he said softly, a note of warning in his voice. Elaine, people like her power is all they have, and they'll do anything to keep it. I met his gaze evenly. I know, I said, but I'm done playing by her rules. Daniel's eyes glinted with approval. Then be careful, he said. And remember, you're not alone. I watched as he turned and walked back into the dining room, his presence a steadying force. For a moment, I let myself lean against the wall, my breath coming slow and even. I thought about everything that had led me here, every slight, every whispered insult, every time I'd bitten my tongue, because I didn't want to cause a scene. Tonight, I'd let it all go, and I felt lighter for it. I straightened my shoulders and walked back into the dining room. As I stepped through the doorway, I caught sight of Noah. His eyes met mine for the first time all evening, and something like shame flickered across his face. I held his gaze for a moment, then let it go. If he wanted to speak, he could, but I was done waiting for him to find his voice. Elaine's expression had hardened into something cold and brittle. Had your fill of fresh air, she asked sweetly, her voice dripping with condescension. I met her smile with one of my own. Just enough, I said lightly. Thank you for your concern. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned her attention to her dessert, her movements stiff and controlled. I sat back down, my mind already moving ahead. This dinner wasn't just a power play for Elaine, it was a test. She wanted to see if I would crumble, if I would fold under the weight of her disdain. But I had no intention of doing either. The conversation shifted back to polite topics, Rebecca mentioning a new gallery opening, Julia murmuring about an upcoming charity gala. I let the words wash over me, offering polite nods and measured responses. But inside my mind was a whirl of clarity. I saw the game for what it was, now a careful dance of power and perception, and I was done letting anyone else lead. Elaine tried one last jab as the final course was cleared away. Well, she said lightly, swirling the last of her wine in her glass, I suppose tonight has been illuminating, hasn't it? I tilted my head, a soft smile playing at my lips. Yes, I said. It really has. And as I held her gaze, I knew she understood exactly what I meant. The tension at the table had settled into a thick, unspoken fog by the time the final course was cleared away. The servers moved quietly, their faces politely neutral, but I could feel the shift in the air with every cleared plate. Elaine sat like a queen at the head of the table, her posture rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. Noah's shoulders were slumped, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, as though he was seeing a future he didn't want to face. I didn't look away. Not anymore. As the last dish was removed, I folded my hands on the table and let the quiet stretch out. The weight of it was almost a comfort. I was done trying to fill the silence for them. Elaine's fingers drummed against the tablecloth, a sharp rhythm that grated against the soft music drifting through the restaurant. So, Hannah, she said finally, her voice calm and almost sweet, tell me, do you really think you've proven anything here tonight? I tilted my head, studying her face. I'm not here to prove anything, I said softly. I'm just here to remind you, and everyone else, who I am. Elaine's lips curved into a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh dear, you always did have such delusions of grandeur. Her fingers stilled, and she leaned forward slightly. But let's be honest, you've always depended on my son's generosity, haven't you? The words were meant to be a dagger, a final blow to strip me of the last shred of dignity. But I didn't flinch. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a small, quiet breath. Generosity, I echoed. No, Elaine. I think you're confused about who's been depending on whom. A hush fell over the table. Rebecca's eyes widened. Julia let out a soft gasp. Noah stiffened his head, jerking up to stare at me, eyes wide. Elaine blinked once, twice, her mask slipping. What are you talking about? She demanded, her voice low and sharp. I smiled, a slow curve of my lips that tasted like freedom. I mean, I said, my voice calm and certain, that everything your son built, every investment, every project, every so-called success, was funded with my money. The words landed like thunder, and the silence that followed was deafening. Elaine's mouth fell open, her face pale. That's that's ridiculous, she sputtered. You're lying. I shook my head slowly. No, I'm not. When Noah wanted to start investing, he didn't have the capital. I did. I gave him everything he needed to build his empire. And he took it every last dollar, without ever once giving me the credit I deserved. Rebecca's mouth worked soundlessly. Julia looked like she might faint. And Noah looked like he wanted to disappear. Elaine's lips parted, her breath, coming in short, shocked bursts. You're lying, she said again, but there was no conviction in her voice. You have no proof. I reached into my bag and pulled out a slim leather folder, the soft click of the clasp loud in the hushed room. I opened it and laid the documents on the table, my hand steady. Here's the proof, I said quietly. The contracts. The transfers. Every cent accounted for. Elaine's eyes darted to the folder, her face draining of color. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the papers, her composure cracking with every line she read. Noah let out a shuddering breath. Hannah, he began, but I cut him off with a small, sharp shake of my head. Don't, I said softly. You sat there and let her humiliate me. You let her treat me like I was nothing. But the truth is, Noah, without me, you'd still be nothing. The words were a blade, but I didn't flinch as I said them. I was done protecting his pride. Done pretending that his silence hadn't been a choice. Elaine's hands dropped from the folder, her fingers curling into fists. How dare you, she breathed. You think you can come in here and I'm not thinking anything, I interrupted calmly. I'm done thinking. I'm done waiting. And I'm done letting you or anyone else decide what I'm worth. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt charged, every breath crackling like static. Then Daniel stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. I think this conversation has run its course, he said, his tone brooking no argument. If you'd like to continue it elsewhere, I suggest you do so. Elaine's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked at Daniel, then at me, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. I stood slowly gathering the folder and slipping it back into my bag. My movements were unhurried, deliberate. Thank you for dinner, Elaine, I said softly. It was enlightening. I turned to Noah, who was staring at me like he'd just realized the ground had vanished beneath his feet. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said quietly, but you won't find it with me. He swallowed hard, his face pale. Hannah, please. No, I said, my voice gentle but final. You made your choice, and I'm making mine. I turned and walked out of the dining room, my head high, my steps steady. As I passed Daniel, he caught my eye and gave a small, approving nod. I smiled faintly in return. The hallway was cool and quiet, the soft lighting casting shadows on the polished wood paneling. I paused for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't with fear. It was with clarity. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. My fingers moved quickly, the text short and precise. We're moving forward. Initiate the process tomorrow. A few seconds later, the reply came, understood. The divorce papers will be ready by noon. I let out a slow breath, feeling the last weight of the evening fall away. Divorce. The word didn't scare me. It felt like freedom, like the first breath after being underwater for too long. I slipped the phone back into my bag and stepped out into the cool night air. The stars were bright above the city, a quiet promise of something new and unbroken. I tilted my head back and let the cold kiss my skin, feeling more alive than I had in years. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And I was ready. I didn't look back as I stepped into the night. The cold air wrapped around me like a fresh start, sharp and invigorating. My breath formed soft clouds in the glow of the streetlights, and with every step I took, the weight of the dinner, of years of silent endurance, fell away. I reached the edge of the restaurant's courtyard, pausing just long enough to glance back at the softly lit windows. Behind them, the laughter and clinking of glasses continued, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Everything had. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked away, my heels clicking on the pavement, with a quiet, steady rhythm. With every step, I felt the lines of my life redrawing themselves, no longer shaped by anyone else's expectations or judgments. When I reached the street, my phone buzzed in my bag. I pulled it out, half expecting a frantic message from Noah, some last attempt to reclaim the control he'd never truly had. But it wasn't Noah. It was my lawyer. A single line, documents are ready. We'll send them first thing in the morning. I felt a flicker of something that might have been grief, but it was brief and it passed like a shadow. Because I knew this wasn't a loss. This was a reclamation. I hailed a cab and gave the driver an address I hadn't visited in months, the penthouse. The one Noah had always claimed as his, but that had always belonged to me. As we sped through the city, I watched the lights blur past the windows, each one a tiny beacon of possibility. When the cab pulled up outside the tall glass building, I stepped out and let the doorman open the door for me. He greeted me with a polite nod, no questions asked. The marble lobby was quiet, the faint echo of my heels on the polished floor, a soft testament to how far I'd come. Upstairs, the penthouse was just as I remembered, spacious, elegant, and wholly mine. I set my bag down on the wide marble counter in the kitchen, running my fingers over the smooth, cool surface. Here there were no whispered insults, no forced smiles or cold stares, just clean lines, soft light, and the quiet certainty of belonging. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched out below me, a living tapestry of lights and motion. I leaned against the railing, letting the cool wind whip through my hair. For a long time I just stood there, breathing it all in. The city, the night, the sharp, exhilarating taste of freedom. When my phone buzzed again, I didn't even hesitate to answer. It was Noah. The name lit up the screen, but the weight it once carried was gone. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then I blocked the number. Just like I had with Elaine earlier that evening. The quiet that followed felt like a promise. I turned back to the city, my mind clear. There was so much I still wanted to do, so many plans that had always taken a back seat to other people's expectations. I'd let myself be small for too long, shrinking to fit inside a box that was never mine to begin with. No more. Inside, I sat at the sleek glass desk by the window, pulling out the documents I'd kept hidden for years, the ones that proved every dollar, every decision, every risk I'd taken to build the foundation of Noah's empire. My empire, really. Piece by piece, I laid them out in front of me, the paper cool and solid beneath my fingers. Elaine had called me a pretender. Noah had let her believe it. But the truth was here in black and white. And tomorrow, the world would know it too. I took a breath and picked up my phone again. This time, I dialed a number I hadn't called in months, my best friend, someone who'd seen me before the polished dinners and the forced smiles. "Hey," I said, when she answered, her voice warm and surprised. "I think I'm finally ready to start over." There was a pause, and then her soft laughter. "It's about time, Hannah." "Where do you want to begin?" I smiled, feeling the first real flicker of excitement I'd felt in years. Anywhere. Everywhere. I ended the call and sat back, the city still glittering around me. I thought of Daniel's words, "You're not alone." And for the first time, I believed it. Tomorrow, the divorce papers would be filed. Tomorrow, I would walk into that lawyer's office and sign away the last ties that had bound me to a life that was never truly mine. But tonight was mine. Every breath, every heartbeat, every quiet moment. I raised my glass to the city, to the night, and to the woman I'd become. To freedom, I murmured, and the words felt like a promise. Then I turned back inside, closing the balcony doors behind me. The air was still warm with the memory of the evening, but I was already moving forward, already seeing past it. Tomorrow would come, and I would be ready, because this wasn't just the end of a dinner or the close of a marriage. This was the start of something I'd been denied for too long, a life that was truly my own. And for anyone watching this story unfold, For anyone who's ever been told they're not enough, for anyone who's ever been made to feel small, let this be your reminder. You don't need their approval. You only need your own. If you felt the power in this story, if you're ready to stand up for yourself, like Hannah did, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind you of your worth. Because you deserve to be the main character of your own life starting now.